I was a sensitive kid, and what I mean by that is that I didn't really like getting scared. I can't quite explain why, but when I was young, I had this extreme dislike of anything that had a creepy atmosphere, or just anything with the intent to freak me out. And I think that because of my opposition to scary stuff, I became more sensitive to it. Like, stuff that freaks me out started to have a bigger effect on me just because I didn't like it. I've grown up a lot since then. Nowadays I love all the weird stuff you can find on YouTube, Local 58, Walton Files. But back then, like, I could barely handle salad fingers.
Hubert Cumberdale, fancy seeing you here.
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier.
So when I was young, my family kind of had this evening routine we'd go through every day, where we'd eat dinner, we'd clean up, and then we'd go into the living room and watch TV for like a half hour or so. And I remember one night we went through this routine as usual, and my dad was flipping through channels, just trying to find something to watch, and he eventually settled on this random movie that was playing on a channel. And I was there, and I was just like, okay, I guess I'm watching this now. And I'm not lying when I say that that movie traumatized me. Like, it legitimately creeped the hell out of me. And this movie really stuck with me afterwards. Like, it was a good few weeks before I was able to get it out of my head. I have this very vivid memory of the next day, like the day afterward, where I was standing in the lunch line at my elementary school, doing a very poor job of trying to explain to my friends why this movie had freaked me out so much. So anyways, I see this film, and it just absolutely terrifies me. The problem was that I didn't know what the movie was called. Like, I never learned the title. So for a very long time, I just had this image of this nameless movie that creeped the hell out of me, just floating around in my mind. And it wasn't until a really long time later that I finally figured it out. I finally learned that the movie that had scared me so bad all those years ago was, in fact, Disney's 1979 classic, The Black Hole. I've wanted to go back and properly watch this film for a really long time now, but I've always just kept pushing it off. But you know what? Screw it. It's October, the month of spooks and scares. So you know what? Let's just confront some childhood fear. So the film starts off introducing us to these deep space explorers who are on their way back to Earth after some, a space mission or something. Of this group, the most notable members are the captain, Dan Holland, played by Robert Forster, Dr. Alex Durant, played by Anthony Perkins, and this woman, Kate McCree, played by, her. They've also got a robot named Vincent, voiced by Roddy McDowall. So they're flying around and they come across a giant black hole in the middle of space, with a ship that's right at its edge, somehow resisting the gravitational pull of it. Their own spacecraft begins to get sucked into the hole, and they have to make an emergency docking at the ship, which they identify as the Cygnus, which is this vessel which everybody believed to have been lost for the past 20 years. So they investigate the ship, and they eventually find the pilot, this crazy-looking guy named Hans Reinhardt. They also meet this thing.
There's someone else with us.
Identify yourself. What is your type and model?
Now, Maximilian, calm down. Don't pick on small people. He's such a nice little robot. He's harmless.
Reinhardt explains that he's the last human being on the Cygnus after he ordered the rest of the crew to return to Earth. What became of the crew, nobody knows, because they never actually returned to Earth. Reinhardt has basically been by himself with his robots for years on board the Cygnus, and he's developed this intense fixation on the black hole. He's spent this time researching a safe way through the hole with this belief that there's something on the other side. The crew are allowed by Reinhardt to just hang out on the Cygnus until they're able to get their own ship repaired and lift off again. Right off the bat, if there's a couple things I think this film does particularly well, it's create this sense of scale and dread. It's difficult to describe exactly, but there's this very clear sense of something being not right here. For example, some of the crew sneak off to investigate other parts of the ship, and one of them in particular comes across this strange funeral-esque ceremony being held. I think dread is also the best word I can use here, especially when it comes to characters such as the big red robot Maximilian. This thing is absolutely terrifying. It doesn't talk, but it's just how it's built that manages to give off this very intimidating nature to it. I think that the whole dread thing also comes partly from the scale of the setting. Like, you get these shots of the ship, and the whole thing just looks absolutely huge. Unfortunately, I think that's also to the film's detriment because there are quite a few points where you can very clearly see the use of like a matte painting or a blue screen or something. It's not very well hidden. So Vincent comes across a robot similar to him named Bob, and they sort of become friends.
Are there any more like us left on board?
I'm the last one. These upstarts think I'm some old freak.
They still haven't improved on our model. Oh, you can't modify perfection. We're the best.
This is pretty much where the whole mystery aspect kind of comes to a head, because eventually Bob reveals to Vincent the true story of what's going on here. So the human-like robots everyone has been seeing are actually humans. They're the original crew of the Cygnus. In actuality, instead of abandoning the ship like Reinhardt claimed earlier, they attempted a mutiny when he refused to return to Earth and chose to instead stay and study the black hole. Reinhardt had them all lobotomized, and they've essentially become his slaves. Durant looks for himself, and we get quite the affirmation in this little scene right here.
What are you doing?
Like, and that's not even the wildest part of this one scene. It's what happens right after.
Come on, Kay, let's get you out of here.
Maximilian!
Is that not the most violent PG death you've ever seen? Like, there's no blood or anything. It's left entirely up to the imagination, but the implications are horrifying. Like, I wouldn't be making such a big deal about this if it wasn't a Disney film, but the fact that this is coming from a company with such a family-friendly image is just fascinating to me. So, with his secret exposed, Reinhardt has Kate taken to be lobotomized, and the rest of the crew have to go and save her. From here on out, this whole movie starts to invite a lot of comparisons to other science fiction movies, especially ones that were relatively recent at the times. The two most obvious comparisons I see are Star Wars and 2001: A Space Odyssey. The Star Wars comparisons are most blatant here, where it's just a bunch of heroes fighting off these faceless enemies with laser guns. You know, like, that's one of the most iconic images in Star Wars. I mean, to be fair, Star Wars could have taken that from somewhere else, but I'm willing to bet that Disney was trying to emulate Star Wars a bit here, you know, seeing as how The Black Hole was only made about 2 years after the success of the original film. You've also got characters like Vincent and Maximilian who resemble other characters like R2-D2 and Darth Vader. As for the 2001 similarities, that becomes more at the end, so I'm just going to kind of save that for later. It's during this rescue mission that one of the crew members, Dan Holland, gets pretty selfish and attempts to save himself by stealing their original spacecraft and just kind of booking it. It gets shot down and he dies, pretty much rendering their main method of escape as just totally up in flames. Suddenly there's this asteroid storm that starts to bombard the Cygnus and damages the ship. The device that originally allowed it to resist the gravitational pull of the black hole is destroyed, and the entire ship just starts getting pulled into the thing. Also, the black hole is red now, I don't know why, but it's red now. They make it to the probe ship, but they're attacked one last time by Maximilian. Vincent is able to fight him off and actually manages to defeat the thing. And let me tell you, his death is just... They're able to blast off in the probe ship, but the thing has a pre-programmed course that takes it right through the black hole, meaning that they have no choice but to just go through that thing and hope they come out the other side. So they go through the hole, and this scene right here, this is what traumatized me as a kid. It's kind of a big scene, so I want to summarize it first, and then afterwards I'll examine it a bit closer. So here we go. We see Reinhardt floating through this red space. He spots Maximilian floating around, and the two of them basically merge together. We see them standing over this strange landscape with these weird humanoid creatures hanging around. As the camera pans down to this giant pit of fire, this strange, shiny corridor appears, and some unidentified figure flies down it. The probe ship is shown flying out of another hole. The crew are still inside, and they seem to have gotten through all right. Their ship flies towards a planet in the distance, and the movie just ends. Okay, so... I said earlier that this film borrows a bit from 2001, and this is the scene where I got that from, mostly. The film leaves the ending entirely up to interpretation. You know, it just shows a bunch of strange footage and imagery, but it leaves the viewer to connect the dots. This might make you wonder what my interpretation is. Well, what I believe this is the film's interpretation of heaven and hell. Reinhardt and Maximilian in this part are not in the black hole, they are descending into hell. This is Reinhardt's punishment for lobotomizing and enslaving his original crewmates, subjecting them to a fate worse than death. He's to be trapped within Maximilian in hell for all time. The bit with the shiny hallway is, in turn, heaven. This creature is an angel or some other kind of heavenly figure guiding the survivors out of the black hole and into a better place. Whether or not the crew actually dies in the black hole or not, I couldn't quite tell you. I'm not going to act like I find this to be any less creepy than the first time I saw it. This ending still legitimately creeps me out. It's the main reason why it took me so long to go back to this film in the first place. Like, I was seriously dreading having to watch this part again. Ending aside, I still think it's a fairly solid film. I certainly wouldn't call it one of Disney's best films, not by a long shot. And looking at the grand scheme of things, I can totally see why it's kind of gotten lost in just this gigantic sea of live-action Disney movies that nobody talks about. If it hadn't had the impact on me that it did, I doubt I would even remember ever seeing the black hole. At the same time, though, I'm kind of okay with that whole thing happening, because, you know, what's the point of life if you don't get freaked out every once in a while?